Good morning, everyone. So I think probably everyone recognizes my face, know who I am. I'm the Dean of Faculty of Hospitality and Tourism Management at MUST. And today, thank you very much to come and to attend this exciting presentation. I know some of you are coming from the cultural tourism heritage background. Am I right, some of you? Who of you can raise your hands? Let me know in the Zhang Yang Lao's the class or anyone. Okay, fantastic. So that's great. Because probably for anyone working on the cultural heritage tourism, probably the name you already know is Professor Dallen Timothy. I mean, sometimes you're using like a Timothy and the boy or some Timothy, whoever. This is a real person right now. I mean, I introduced Professor Dallen Timothy to come. Dallen is very prolific and also the most famous, I think, that the person in the field of cultural heritage tourism. Virtually every publication or whatever in the future when you cite or doing any kind of work, Dallen is the person. I mean, of course, personally, I also kind of like, trying to introduce Dallen because Dallen and I we share the same supervisor at the University of Waterloo. So he is my actually it's like it's like a big brother who's giving me a lot of support and all the things. So it's a very it's a personal wise. It's kind of like a very interesting we get connected again because last time I met Dan, and I think that was in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. It's got to be like 20 years, So we haven't changed that much. I mean, Dan still have a very lot of hairs, and I still have a very dark hair, so we are good. So now let's come and welcome Professor Timothy, and also the title is Heritage Tourism and Democratization of Ordinary Heritage. And I will just hand my mic to you, so that it's your turn, and we are all your fans.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dean Chief, for that introduction. It's really a nice opportunity to be here with you. I appreciate the chance to do that. When I told him I was going to be in China this week, he was excited and he jumped on the opportunity to do that. I was speaking at the Tourism Tribune conference in Luoyang, and I thought it was a good opportunity to come to Macau the same trip. So I think you probably understand, based on the Chinese translation, what is meant by the democratization of ordinary heritage. But I have two goals today for both the research and teaching staff as well as the students. Two goals, and the first goal is to challenge you to a fight. To challenge you to think about cultural heritage from an extremely broad perspective. That's my first goal. I want you to think differently from how we normally think about cultural heritage. My second goal is I want to raise more questions than I can answer. Okay. It might sound crazy for the students, but as the faculty members, as we know, it's important to raise questions because it keeps us in business. Okay. We can keep answering questions for the rest of our lives. And so my point is that those are my two goals, to get you thinking very broadly about cultural heritage beyond what we normally think, and also to raise more questions than we can answer. So I'm just going to give you a couple of, is there a way to turn off some of the lights so that it's just a little bit darker in the front, maybe? Perfect. Is that okay? Because there's a lot of photographs and I want you to be able to see this as well. Okay. So, I think, based on all of the research that we have in the world, and there are thousands and thousands of people researching cultural tourism, I think cultural heritage is probably the most common form of tourism in the world. Or, maybe a better way to say that, is that cultural heritage is the most common and pervasive resource that we use for tourism. Okay? Because almost every kind of tourism, even, believe it or not, even casino tourism, is in some ways a form of heritage. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Almost all holiday packages and tours and travel agencies somehow involve heritage in their package itineraries. Whether it's a stop at an old temple or a cathedral or anything like that, it's usually part of the product. Okay? Some estimates suggest that about 80%, maybe even more than that, the World Tourism Organization suggests about 80% of all tourism involves some element of heritage. And then in many countries and regions, as we know, heritage is the most important tourism product. Okay, so we just some interesting contextual issues. Now I'm getting into the problem very quickly. And the problem is that tourism, as an industry or a set of industries, has long focused on heritage that are extraordinary, big, fancy. I call it grandiose. Okay? Tourism has always valued the great heritage more, the tangible heritage, and the ancient or very, very old heritage. That has been the main focus of tourism. And for tourism to value cultural heritage, these have been the three main criteria. Okay? And of course we know that countries work very, very hard to brand their big heritage and their ancient heritage with things such as the UNESCO brand, okay? Which is, as anybody knows, mainland China uses this a lot in its development of tourism as a major brand. So, what we have to realize that from an academic perspective at least, and maybe some of you are going to work as guides or interpreters or museum workers or in the industry, the hotel and restaurant industry, but I think we all need to understand, and it's not just academics doing theoretical research, but we also have to understand that we need a certain degree of truth in tourism. And this will become a little bit clearer later when we talk about slavery, okay? Because you'll see what I mean in just a minute. But I want you to think about truth in marketing, truth in managing and developing tourism. Authenticity, there's many different ways of viewing authenticity. We're not going to talk much about that. But all of this gets back to this point again. I think it's important that we as industry workers or we as researchers think about truth and how we depict heritage. Okay? Historical truths and realities. And one of those, I'll mention it now, and maybe it'll come up again later, because Professor Xie says I only have 3 hours today, right? So, anyway, the idea is that, some estimates suggest that 80 billion people, 80 billion people have lived on the earth. Okay? Let's think about what percentage of 80 billion people lived in palaces or castles or were bishops and kings. Mm-hmm. But the majority of heritage that we sell is about palaces and castles and kings and queens. Okay. So maybe we need to rethink heritage and how the image of heritage is produced. And part of that is through this democratization, which means let's take heritage from the rich, white, famous people, and let's start looking at the value of heritage from the everyday, common, ordinary person, because that's the majority of the world, right? So, and that's basically the last line too, this idea of creating a heritage scape from vernacular cultures. So, as a result of this discussion and this idea of truth in marketing, there are 3 myths or misconceptions that I've identified about cultural heritage. One is that, as I said, tourism has focused on extraordinary, large, and momentous. It focuses on very old or very ancient and tangible. Do you believe me? This is how tourism thinks. This is how the cultural industries think about what sells. So here's some examples. This is in Mexico, Teotihuacan. These great pyramids, very, very impressive. A lot of tourists want to go there, near Mexico City. Very ancient, very tangible, and very grand. Here we have, of course, part of the Forbidden City in Beijing. Okay, very grand, very rich, very ancient. This is the Royal Palace in Copenhagen, Denmark. Okay, this is where the Queen and the King live. Prambanan in Indonesia. Yeah, great temples. You all recognize this one in Las Vegas. No. This one is actually in India. Donald Trump didn't build this one. It's all the Taj Mahal. This one is interesting, and I want you to remember this picture, because it's going to come up again later without the picture. But this is an island in the Caribbean known as Barbados. You can say Barbados in Chinese. Barbados something. Chinese people don't know what it is, but it's usually when I speak about it. But Barbados is this island country in the Caribbean. And the Caribbean, this is based on the slave heritage, where the Africans were brought over to the New World to work in sugar production. Okay? And so this was the house of the white guy who owned the black people. So this is the slave owner's house. This has become a college and a museum. Now, again, I'm going to talk about this imbalance in heritage, the truth in heritage. So the idea, so you think it's a big, beautiful home, it's very fancy, it's a college and a museum. So later we'll talk about the ordinary heritage. This is not ordinary. This is George Washington's house. So again, a nice big house, very nationally important house in the United States. And of course, the St. Peter's in the Vatican. Big Batalha in Portugal. This is somebody's house in Ireland. And this is in Nepal and in Lourdes, France. Okay, so my point in these is that this is what tourism focuses on, right? This is the heritage all of us want to see. This is what sells and is marketable in Budapest. Okay, so I want to define heritage. This is not my definition, by the way. This is sort of a global recognized definition of heritage. Okay? So heritage is what we inherit from the past and we use today. It's a basic definition of heritage. The past is history. Heritage is how we use the past. It's a little bit different. So it's a very comprehensive view of heritage, a very comprehensive definition of heritage. And it entails things that are intangible, not very old, and not great. Okay? If you think about it, 99.9999999% of all heritage is not great, and it's not tangible, and it's not old. So we have to think about that from a tourism narrative, or at least from a heritage protection narrative. Okay? So early evidence shows that Western tourists are now, as they become more educated, they're seeking different experiences. Yes, they want to see the Great Wall of China, but they also want to see the small villages and the cemeteries and the things like that. Okay? So they're starting to want a more balanced and realistic version of heritage. So, this raises the question about the three myths: big, tangible, and old. What about ordinary heritage? What about new heritage? And what about intangible heritage? These are forgotten in the tourism narrative. Okay? So, this happened just last week in Luoyang. We were walking in the old city of Luoyang with some colleagues, and we're walking on the street, and I saw this shop. And I said, wow, I really like this little shop. It's so fascinating, and it's such an important piece of Luoyang's heritage. And a Chinese professor who was with me said, that's not heritage, it's too simple. Why does heritage happen? Why can heritage not be simple? But it's the way we think about it. It's the way tourism thinks about it. It's the way we as individuals think about heritage. Here's the shop. Beautiful. For the Westerners, right? Maybe for the Chinese, just jumping. But to me, this shop is a very important illustration of Luoyang's heritage. And even inside, it's fantastic. I wanted to go shopping in there, but we didn't have time. So I'll go back to that shop. Even the products in the shop are elements of heritage. But we don't think about that, because we're more interested in the big Might be very old. This is a sign. Read this.
Wow.
I hope you get it. Even if your English isn't great, I think you understand this point. I took this picture in England. Somebody had it on their farm. So what it means is every place has heritage. Nothing happened here, but it's still a place. You know, it still has some kind of heritage. Oh, you recognize this in Las Vegas? No, this is Sydney, right? And the Opera House. Now, it's very iconic. This is sort of the brand image for Australia. But it's new heritage. It's 40 years old. Okay. It's not ancient heritage, but it's still an important part of Australia's heritage. Now, of course, the music and the plays and the orchestras, those are a very important part of heritage as well. It's pretty sad.